Good evening, and welcome to my week 7 video discussion about leadership. In this presentation, I'm going to be answering the question, what does educational research say about leadership? And how am I going to lead in the future? In answering those questions, I chose to review an article called Leadership Matters, what the research says about the importance of principal leadership. This was written by Joan Bartoletti and Gail Connolly in 2013, and it was published um, by the National Association for Secondary School Principals and the National Association of Elementary School Principals. I chose this article because what I liked is it really looked at a lot of different research out there and condensed it all down and pulled from a lot of sources. And it gave a lot of input. I used a lot of the research came from the Wallace Foundation, which is a very reputable educational research organization. And also, I really liked it had a strong, their focus was really about a strong link between school leadership and student success and achievement. And that really ties into what this whole course this semester has been about. So I thought this was a very fitting article to review. Before we get into some of the highlights from this article, the authors share a quote, or I'll share a quote from the authors. Great schools do not exist apart from great leaders. Um, so they dive into discussing what great leaders need. And the authors, Bartoletti and Connolly, they describe great leaders as um, saying that there's five key functions of principal leadership. So they go into great detail talking about these five key functions of principal leadership. And I'm going to go through these five because this is really the heart of the article here. And we'll just go through them and talk a little bit about each one. First one is um, first key foundation is shaping a vision of academic success for all students. Um, they really cite this as crucial for any organization for any organization that needs improvement. You really need to have that vision. Um, and what you need to do as a leader, you really have to help those stakeholders agree upon what that worthwhile direction is, and then prod and support them along the way in moving towards that direction. So number one is shaping that vision. The second key foundation for principals is creating a climate hospitable to education. Uh, Ultimately, leaders have a responsibility to create a culture for all the stakeholders of the school community. Uh, Utmost importance is for the students, but then you also have the family members, other school uh, community members, teachers, school personnel, staff. All of those people need to feel welcome. Um, And what it really comes down to is creating an environment where all students really feel safe and secure to be themselves and to take that risk into furthering their learning. So number two is climate, and number three is cultivating leadership in others. Principals need to spend time in developing uh, and helping teachers in their professional growth. Um, and what principals need to do is make teachers and all support staff and school personnel feel valued and really try to build on their strengths and focus on those areas for improvement. And this is where coaching and feedback really comes into play, especially for teachers. How can principals guide those teachers into becoming more effective in helping student learning? Number four, Number four key foundation for principals is improving instruction. And when they talked about improving instruction, they really took it from a lens of student learning, which I really appreciated that. And how do we impact what's their biggest bang for buck on moving the learning towards a positive direction for students. Um, in the article, they talked about the use of formative assessments to get the real time picture of what learning is going on. They discussed, using evidence based practices to promote that learning. Uh, so improving instruction was a key foundation. And lastly, the um, key foundations for principal leadership. Number 5 is managing people, data, and processes to foster school improvement. And this slide here kind of summarizes that. Um, Principals need to be able to work within this crazy system here of many moving parts and work with each of them individually, um, so that all of them can work as a greater whole. Uh, so really, a principal needs to be a systems analyst. There's multiple constituencies to answer to. Then there's like building physical structures, things like that need to be dealt with, people, management, uh, all of that. Um, so really, you know, this is a great. I think those 5 steps are really uh, great areas that principals need to focus on. Um, so moving on, well, before I move on to the next slide, I just want to say that if you, and listening to my presentation here, you maybe thought, wow, a lot of this sounds like a lot of our course. And I found a lot of analogies too. And it was kind of reinforcing of the material we covered in this course. And all of uh, these five key functions of principal leadership, they really point back to what we learned about in week 1, which was the 3 big ideas of PLC. So after reviewing this article, I pulled up this previous slide I used in a presentation, and I looked at these 5 key functions that the author suggests are important for principal leadership, and I just pointed them at the big idea of a PLC, which uh, I thought was kind of interesting to do. So, number 1, which is shaping a vision, that clearly points to um, you know focusing on student learning, all that. Really, it could point to creating a collaborative culture too. The vision could help shape that. Uh, Key foundation number 2, creating uh, that hospitable climate for education and that nurturing environment. And that really relates to the big idea of building a collaborative culture. Um, Foundation number 3, which was cultivating leadership. Again, that points to that collaborative culture, leading people, and also, that can really help with student learning too. And number 4, improving instruction. Again, the focus of instruction should be student learning. And lastly, number 5 was managing people, data, and processes, the whole systems management of a school. And that really points at focusing on the results, using that data to move forward. So I thought that was a nice tie-in to what we've been covering in the course. 2 other takeaways from um, this article that I really liked. They spent some time talking about how good principals really need to do due diligence in attracting, supporting, and retaining high quality teaching staff or teachers. Um, if you're able to do all those 5 key foundations that the author suggests, they think great teachers will come and stay at your school. Uh, and they cited some research where teachers were interviewed about what made them stay at a school and not leave. And majority of the teachers said it was their leadership. So leadership is really key, especially to the retaining a high quality staff. So that is something definitely to keep in mind when trying to work towards school improvement. And next slide, we're going to discuss some of the barriers that the research highlight or discovered for barriers for principals in school improvement or barriers with their profession. One of them being district and school connection. Again, that comes down to that systems, working within that system, all the different connections, and sometimes there's disconnections, and trying to make sure those are working, they're fluid between each other. That was a big, they cited that as a big reason. Also, some principals, and a lot of this was came from interviewing principals who either left the profession or uh, weren't pleased in the positions that they were in. Another one barrier was feelings of being ineffective. Principals often felt, the ones that left the profession, that there's a high accountability placed on them, high expectations, and feeling like they have little influence over the many factors affecting success. Tying in with that, some principals felt very isolated, felt like they were kind of on their own island trying to create change. Um, and the workload. Some principals cited the workload was way too much. Um, and they cited inadequate pre-service training, whether it be, and that ties into lack of support as well. So whether that be college training program or mentorship program or growing leadership within your own system, there's not a lot out there. Like for teachers, there's not a lot of like growing your own leader so much. So one thing to be aware of is how can you support those who want to go into leadership. So after analyzing that article, um, and taking some of the concepts from the course, it really made me think, what am I going to do as a leader? How am I going to try to transform change? So I'm going to spend a little time answering that second question. How am I going to lead? So this next section was actually fairly easy to talk about. Of course, easier said than done. But this course really laid out a very nice foundation to build up from. And some of the big takeaways, not just from the course, but from the articles and research that I read in this week, really pointed towards these four cornerstones of the professional learning community. And these really need to be used to drive school improvement. So as I move into a bigger leadership role, I'll really keep these four cornerstones uh, at the forefront. Um, and ultimately, also in school improvement efforts will come back to these four um, questions. What specifically do we expect all students to learn? How will we know when each student has learned what we expect? How will we respond when students are having difficulty learning? And lastly, how will we respond when students demonstrate that they have learned? So the review of the article actually covered a lot of this. So it's kind of interesting how everything kind of weaved together. Um, so PLC, those whole uh, constructs really are going to be um, are going to be used for me to move forward. And how do we answer these questions? Well, again, the course laid out a very nice framework for that. Um, Answering that number one question, what are we going to do, or what are students going to learn? What do we expect them to learn? That's where the mission, focusing on a mission, vision, value, and goal statement for a school, for any learning community, is very important. So leadership, I as a leader have to help guide that. Also have to help shape the curriculum. And this all comes back to what do we expect students to learn? How are we going to help them? How are we going to respond? Grading and assessments come into play. How are we going to measure when they're learning effectively? And then how are we going to respond when they aren't learning? What are the interventions? What are we going to do when they're doing really well? How do we move forward? And lastly, coaching and feedback. So all of these areas really address school improvement. So if we're using these areas to help answer those questions, ultimately, uh, leaders should be able to move a school in the direction of improvement. And lastly, I'm going to just Well, I got two slides left. This one just kind of focuses more on, I guess, personal personalities, leadership styles, things like that. Um, but ultimately, be that leader, be the kind of leader that you would follow. Who is that person? All right. And my last slide, I'm going to talk about my personal code of ethics. I felt like this was a worthwhile time to share that in this course last spring. I was in the ED 750 School Law, which was an amazing course. If you haven't taken it yet, be prepared. You're going to learn a lot. But one of the assignments was to develop that personal code of ethics. And I found that to be really valuable too. It really kind of centers you on like what is important for me as an educator. How am I going to lead ethically? And I think that all ties into being a good leader. So I'm going to just share a little bit about what those are real briefly. Um, and in my life here, I really come back to, I put a picture of my sweet dearest grandma Nora up here. She actually passed away about 6 years ago, right about this time actually. So this is the time when I kind of really think about her a lot, but she was really instrumental in my life. And she always, from time I was a wee little kid, was always like, you know, you know, do the right thing when nobody's around, or do the right thing when nobody's watching. Those words always stuck in my head, and I heard them over and over again. And she always was a person full of kindness, and anywhere she was, you could just see like that kindness and respect and love just really permeated. Um, the space she was around. So I really hold her in my heart closely, and I hope that her words of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, will guide me as a leader. Um, Little did I know, I thought those were her words. As I became older, I realized that she probably stole those words. I know C.S. Lewis said that integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. So she maybe plagiarized from him, but nonetheless, a great message. And I'm always going to hear her voice. And here she is, just looking at my cousin here shortly. Um, I think the year that she passed, and you can just see she's beaming with happiness, and that's just a glow that she always had. Also, I just summarized some of my code of ethics. I had multiple of them, but I put them into kind of broad themes. And so I have always show respect and honor diversity, from your students to family to your front office staff to the custodians, teachers, community members. All of those really show respect and honor the diversity, and then look through everything with an equity lens. Uh, I think that's very important too. And then be student centered, uh, and that really tied in nicely to this course. Be strategic, and lastly, honor the profession. Leave the profession in a better place um, than it was before you got into it. So overall, um, thanks for listening. I hope I answered or summarized the article well, and tied it into our course. And then lastly, just kind of tied it into my personal journey as I move forward, and how hopefully I will guide. I want to wish all of you the best luck as you finish this course and move on to bigger and better initiatives. And I hope all of you have a wonderful holiday season coming up. Thank you.